Hang on a second. There we go.
I'm Bradley Showman, Office of Legislative Counsel, and I am going to just walk through an amendment to Senate Bill 323. This is draft 3.1 on the committee's website. It's a version of an amendment that I presented last week. And now I'm looking at it, there is one small change that I do want to go over. And so First, the first instance of amendment, there's 5 instances of amendment in this bill. The first instance of amendment amends the purpose section. And so the purpose of this subchapter, it's adding a sentence. It says the purpose of this subchapter is also to support small business hemp producers and processors in taking advantage of intrastate opportunities for the cultivation and sale of hemp and hemp products. And so the committee in its discussions have been talking about an intrastate market, have been talking about supporting small businesses. And so I received instruction to kind of add that into the purpose section. I do want to advise when we're talking about intrastate opportunities and an intrastate market, there are potential constitutional questions with the United States Constitution Privileges and Immunities Clause. And and so if there are provisions in rule or in law that discriminate between in-state versus out-of-state producers, different fees, different access to the market and things of that sort, it's potentially a violation of the United States Constitution. And the sort of analysis that goes along with that is the courts will look at, is there discrimination? So different fees might be a form of discrimination. And is there a fundamental right to the underlying thing? So the right to work is technically a fundamental right, and the right to work or access the market has been shown to be a fundamental right in some situations. The right to commit crimes is not a right at all. It's not a fundamental right. And so when we're talking about hemp, that's the question. Is it a drug that's unlawful in interstate commerce, or is it something that is lawful in interstate commerce? And if hemp meets the definition of federal law, as for what hemp is, then it is a lawful product in interstate commerce. If it has a greater THC content than the federal law allows, it is not a lawful product in interstate commerce. And so the short explanation of this is just when thinking about giving direction to the Cannabis Control Board or drafting rules and regulations here, drafting statutory provisions here, just be mindful that if we're talking intrastate markets, exceptions for intrastate processors or producers of hemp, it might run into a privileges and immunities problem down the line if an out-of-state purveyor is trying to access the market and they're barred, and that market is a lawful market. So it's a level of complexity that I wanted just to caution the committee of.
So could we address that concern by just striking the word intrastate?
Potentially. I mean, I think that addresses the concern. I think I think what might result from the Cannabis Control Board regulations, or Cannabis Control Board rules, when the committee directs them to do rulemaking or gives them the opportunity to do rulemaking, might also, run afoul of those privileges and immunities clause, the United States Constitution. And so it would behoove the committee to also, give the board some instruction potentially. It's just something worth thinking about. But striking intrastate does, address some of that concern, because then there isn't a specific direction just to kind of look at an intrastate market from the legislature, and someone who is potentially aggrieved by the laws or rules might not be able to point to that piece then.
Yeah. So I think that this sentence was essentially intended to give the board a little more emphasis, put a little more emphasis on our thinking here. As we get further down, we'll see what our thinking was, but that we're not in this, in the language we got in front of us, we're not saying, here's what a small producer or a craft producer is, and here's what their fee should be. So we rather than spell it out that way, we've said, we're going to ask them to make rules. And then here, just right up front, we're sort of supporting that in advance, saying we want to be clear that part of our intent is to support small manufacturers. I think taking interstate out makes that message no less clear. So I would say that if interstate is problematic from a constitutional standpoint, let's get rid of it.
Should I go on?
Okay.
Section 2 is when I was moving things around on the Senate side, we realized a little too late here that there is a error in a cross-reference. So the second instance of amendment just fixed an error in a cross-reference.
Bradley, just before we move on from that first paragraph, what was the workaround for like the definition of local foods that did not run afoul of interstate commerce?
It's before I was here.
Yeah. That, it was the same sort of bind where if you favor local foods, then you're disfavoring, processors and farmers from out of state.
Yeah, potentially.
We figured out, and that reminds me of that to some extent.
Yeah, potentially. And one thing is, economic. The state can have a compelling justification for discriminating against out-of-state commerce, right? And so economic protectionism is not a compelling justification, but feasibly, and I'm not familiar with what the justification for local foods is, but that, it's something that I can take a look at. But there might be a compelling justification in reducing greenhouse gas emissions or engaging. I want to be able to kind of think, to support, I guess, supporting local business is economic protectionism, right? And so what would the rationale be? So I guess I don't have a complete answer now. I'm trying to process that, but I can look into that.
And we changed the definition too, because I think it used to be something like 30 miles of where it was being sold, maybe, to now it's just Vermont products, right? It used to be cross borders and still be local.
I think you're right. I think it has to be Vermont.
Now,
Described as local. But I don't know beyond that.
And so in the third section, so this is a rulemaking section of S323 that is optional rulemaking, right? And so the bill itself just says the Cannabis Control Board may make rules on the following items. So this is not required rulemaking, it's permissive rulemaking. Number 8 and number 9 are already in S323 as passed by the Senate. Prohibiting hazardous additives is number 8. And then or specify additive limits relative to substances that are toxic, not generally recognized as safe, or designed to make the product more addictive or appealing to persons under 21 years of age, to mislead consumers, are at the bottom of page 1. We're moving over to the top of page 2. Number 9 is also in S323, the as passed by version. Specify when a registered hemp product that contains more than 0.4 milligrams of THC must be restricted for sale to persons 21 years of age or older, or restricted for sale in specified settings or both. And then, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw a hand. I'm so sorry.
Is that 3 years in dog's age? Dog treats.
So we're looking at number 9.
Yeah, number 9, dog treats, I think they use full spectrum and may contain more than 4 milligrams by weight. Of course, this is the federal definition thing, which may or may not stick. And today, interestingly, on Como, and I didn't stay in my truck to listen to it, but at 8:30, he had Rand Paul coming on to talk about hemp. Rand Paul is gearing up to go after all this, and hopefully I can find it online, so I wanted to hear it. It'll surprise you, John, but I am a Chris Como fan. Right and left coming together to do what's reasonable.
So the question is, 21 years of age, and would somebody be able to buy a pet? Like,
Yeah,
potentially use pet treat if they're under 21 and
Well, not if they're under 21.
Can't.
Yeah.
okay, so that was just doesn't restrict the user, it restricts the purchaser.
That is correct. That's correct. That's correct.
Purchasers cannot be a dog. They can have.
It's a very smart dog
Maybe, right,
Well,
yeah.
coming up.
So further point, the salves. When you have an injury and you're using the salve. And if it's full spectrum, it's probably going to be over the 0.4 milligrams of THC in it. And, now it's got to be purchased by an adult. Does this say it has to be used by the adult?
I mean, this just restricts the sale. And so use of it would be cannabis. And so use, I think our cannabis regulations restricted to 21 years of age. Actually, I think it's 21 years of age.
Yeah.
And so it would be unlawful for a person to use it if they're under 21 years of age, if it is cannabis. And I think that that's this kind of gray area is, do we define it as cannabis? Do we define it as hemp? I think federally speaking, it's cannabis. And so it's certainly unlawful in federal if the federal law does not change, right? If the federal law doesn't change, it's cannabis. And so that's certainly unlawful. In the states, I think if the legislature passes this bill as it is, then this would also not be hemp anymore. It has more than 0.4 milligrams of THC because it doesn't, this bill would conform to the federal definition of hemp. And then so it would not be cannabis. So someone under 21 years of age wouldn't be able to use it lawfully, but they certainly could not be able to purchase it lawfully.
Which leads me to, I think it's my third point. If this law does not go into effect November 1st, do we put a clause in this saying if the federal law is changed back to the way it was before, all this is a moot point and we go back to the way we were? Just wrong about that, back to the way we were.
I have a response to that. So this bill ties the definition of hemp to the federal law. So if the federal law were to change, so would this bill. Now, here's the kicker. So this piece here, number 9, is permissive rulemaking from the Cannabis Control Board. And so what you wouldn't necessarily have to change the bill in its entirety. Because the bill itself ties the definition of hemp to federal law. If you did not want to permit the Cannabis Control Board to make regulations about hemp items that have 0.4 milligrams of THC content, if the federal law did not go into effect, the committee should specify that. But right now, it's optional rulemaking. So if the federal law does not change, if the federal law does change, and the current definition of hemp is restored, the Cannabis Control Board may not make rulemaking, but that is completely up to them. They could still go forward with it without instruction from the committee.
Good, and I think we heard that the work on this bill began before anybody knew that in last November that there were going to be federal changes made at, surprising changes made at the last minute. Let's keep going.
Okay.
So 8 and 9 are actually in S323.
Yes.
You included them here just for a reminder.
I included, I mean, they actually do give good context because especially number 9 kind of touches on the issue that we're talking about is what to do with that 0.4 a hemp product has 0.4 milligrams. And the answer in this amendment, and well, actually the answer in the bill as passed is the Cannabis Control Board will make rules and figure it out.
Yeah.
And so the legislature has not given them guidance on that piece other than that. And that's in as passed by, but actually I put that in there because I had to just change some things to add to a list, technically speaking. And so that's why they're there on a technical standpoint. Number 10 is this amendment would change the bill to permit the Cannabis Control Board to define craft processor as a class of small businesses with different needs and risks and exempt craft processor licensees from the requirements of the subchapter that the board finds to be unnecessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And so I think the question for this is what is a craft processor? What is a small business? And does the legislature want to give some not guardrails is the wrong word, but give some framework around what those items are, or leave it to the Cannabis Control Board entirely?
Yeah. So, and what we've done here, I think, is the latter, right?
Mhm.
Leaving it to the board to make those decisions rather than put up any guard or include guardrails or more specificity. And I think, and I'll say this again for the committee's sake, that we all agreed last Wednesday that that's what we wanted to do. We asked Bradley to draft this language. He came in with it on Thursday. Then there was some rethinking about it. And so I said, okay, let's pause. And then there was conversations over the weekend. I think where we were left was, no, we still like this. So we can continue to have that discussion again. But I just want to refresh everyone's memory that we did have that discussion last week and agree that this is what we wanted to do.
And number 11 and 12 deal with fees. So this would give the Cannabis Control Board ability to waive or reduce licensing fees for craft processor applicants pursuant to a rule or a readily accessible policy. So this would not even require the Cannabis Control Board to do rulemaking. They could just make a policy about the fees. And then exempt certain product categories from the requirement to register under this chapter. Now, one thing that I do want to highlight is that Ways and Means would want to examine this language and to get some justification for why to waive fees and things of that sort. They might have questions about this provision because that is their jurisdiction. But that is what the instruction is so far.
And they will have to examine it anyway because of the fees.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Representative Nelson.
This section here is going to about the part of fees for products.
All of this, yeah.
So what would people think that we make a one-time fee for a product? Earlier, in an earlier version, it mentioned $75. So you make a tincture and it's $75. That's your product. You have a recipe, you stick to your recipe. If you make a new product, 6 months later, a year later, a new recipe, you have to file for, even though it's a tincture, but you have one tincture that's one thing, one tincture that's different, you have, or a different salve, you have to register that product. That gives the Cannabis Control Board a heads up saying, somebody's got a new product. We ought to go have a look at it, check the the ingredients in it, make sure they're all up to snuff, how it's going to be used. What's the lab assay say on the finished product? But not make them register their products every year or every time they make a new, they make a tincture, they make a batch of so many bottles. Then next time they make a batch, not charging them every time they make a batch, but when they change the ingredients or change to a different a different methodology. And that they just, by paying that fee, it's send a notification to the CCB that they have a new product out.
So I think that we talked about that last week.
And we kind of left it up in rules, right?
Yeah, and then that came up again. I think Michelle asked.
I'm trying to find the
Question.
answer that was sent to me that is really long about what their concerns were. And now,
So I think that you can keep looking for it.
Yeah.
Michelle, but I think the board's position was that there's a logic to having there be an annual fee associated with at the product level. But I think there's also just a revenue question and trying to find the right balance so that the work that the board is going to be doing now that it hasn't done in the past, that has to be somehow paid for. Unless we want to take it out of the general fund, it needs to come out of the cannabis fund. So I think there's sort of two things happening there. One is that we need to be mindful just of the general revenue, and that we haven't told them that they can't do that. We've said you may create rules. So the rules could do that if they decided that's what they wanted to do.
Okay, well, everything they sell is subject to the 6% sales tax. It's not without tax on it. It's all subject to,
That doesn't go into their.
no, it
fund.
goes in the general fund.
Yeah.
And,
Is cannabis
It's
6%?
education fund.
Are cannabis products 6% or are they different?
no, they're 14% or they're 6% with a 14% excise tax, 20%. But hemp is 6%, which all goes to the general fund, and the cannabis fund now has been used over here and they get their funding from the general fund.
But hemp edibles don't get taxed at all.
Oh, I think they get taxed at 6%. They're not food.
Well, but they are food sometimes.
So why don't we
Yeah.
wait until we have somebody who can answer that for us? But why don't we, all right, so policy wise, let's put a pin in that, unless you've got.
what part of the response to that, I had a question about that, basically doing an amendment to do what you just said, Richard. And there was partly it was stated that the Cannabis Control Board has the authority to make exemptions for certain categories so that if something doesn't make sense, they can make an exemption, but we don't really know what that would be. But if we trust them, they can exempt certain products from needing to have whatever the fee is. They can make an exemption if they decide it makes sense for small producers or something like that. There was a concern that the one-time fee was not going to cover all of the needs that they would have. They're concerned about formulations, changing labels, et cetera. I mean, I guess I feel from our side, like what you just said, if somebody makes a product and there's a one-time fee, but an understanding, if anything changes, then there's going to be another fee that would cover that. So there was a concern that things would change and it might not be covered if we only had it once instead of an annual fee. But I think we could put the wording in a different way if we wanted to, that would cover that concern.
You know, part of the concern for that fee stuff with currently the way they sell their hemp products, they sell them, you know, I don't know if I'd call it globally, but they can export them. You know, they make those seltzer drinks and they export them out of state. And so they have robust revenue. If this changes November 1st, their only market is 640,000 people in the state of Vermont. And if it's over 0.4, it's down to, I don't know, 250,000, you know, everyone over 21. Although there's a bunch of us over 60. Yeah. But anyway, so it's being careful that we don't, you know, how many fees can they absorb on the market that's just been, you know, we heard from the first witness we took, most of her stuff is exported out of state, sold through, you know, the internet.
I think the change that Richard's talking about would make sense if we add enough language that it, you know, that it's clear that if there's a change, they're gonna have to pay the fee again.
And either we put it in now or we wait to see how the rules come out. And if we like the rules, we leave it. And if the rules we don't like, then we legislate it. Policy it. Yeah.
So that, yeah, I mean, that's come up several times that, you know, the rules will be still in draft form when we get back, when the legislature's back in January. So there's an opportunity there. Let's just finish looking at what the language it has here, and then we can come back to the policy discussions.
So, the fourth instance, section B1 is in the bill currently. The board shall adopt rules to establish requirements for the licensure and of processors of hemp-derived process intermediaries and hemp products. So currently in the bill, and this amendment adds, regulate the use of hemp processing facilities and equipment to permit processors to use the same equipment for hemp and cannabis processing and to prevent cross-contamination between hemp and cannabis.
Okay, good. Yeah, and this was something that had come up and we'd asked. And we agreed, I think, that it made sense to try and speak to that. Go.
Yeah, line 18, regulate the use of hemp processing facilities. As I understand it, talking to people this weekend, most hemp processing facilities don't have a CO2 extractor. They use cannabis processing facilities as a CO2 extraction, or maybe a company is set up just to do extraction. So I think we need to strike out the first word, that, you know, regulate the use of processing facilities instead of saying hemp processing facilities, because it wouldn't be hemp, it wouldn't be marijuana, cannabis going to hemp processing facilities. It'd be hemp going to a processing facility. So just be striking out that word hemp.
So on line 18,
Yeah.
regulate the use of processing facilities
Yes.
and equipment to permit processors to use the same equipment for hemp and cannabis processing. Okay.
And, you know, the prevent cross contamination between hemp and cannabis, which is important, just like preventing a cross contamination of chocolate milk and whole milk or skim milk or 2%. You got to have a clean break in your line.
Ben and Jerry Seconds were originally, right? Basically changed lines.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Well, heck, that wasn't a bad thing. We could get them at the fireman place for cheap. But it's, you know, and I would hope they wouldn't make it, you know, you got to run hemp for 2 weeks and then you can run cannabis. I don't know how big a slug of something they get at one time, like how much hemp crude shows up. You know, someone wants it and they say, well, we can't do hemp crude for another 4 months, so your shelves are going to run out of product. But, we can do your hemp crude. We gotta run a cannabis we gotta do right now, then we'll clean out and boot up and we'll do hemp for a period of time, and then we'll clean out and boot up and go back to cannabis.
Well, we're giving the board that leeway here, and arguably it's because they can think about all the different, what ifs better than, and we might be able to, so.
It's good to say it though, when they're sitting in the room behind you.
So let's flag that anyway on line 18.
The hemp piece, yeah, I think that makes sense. And now we're looking at the fifth instance of amendment on the top of page 3. This is just because I read this section a little bit more clearly and just how it was written. It did not appear, and after conferring with JFO, we confirmed that it actually did not give them, the Cannabis Control Board, authority to actually collect and then deposit the fees for hemp into their cannabis regulation fund. And so this does change that language to do that. And so that this is a change to that piece.
Okay. So this is cleaning up, it's not a technical change necessarily, but it's cleaning up something that,
Yeah.
okay, John?
Will hemp, just for accounting reasons, be kept differently on the spreadsheet too? Revenue comes in?
I don't see a requirement to do that. They might, as a matter of practicality, do that. I don't see an actual requirement.
I just didn't know if it might be a good reason to have a paper trail.
I think one, let's see, actually, I would actually have to, I was just about to say something. I'd have to actually look at it, because I think the statute as passed by says that the fees will support the hemp. Right?
They're dedicated.
Yeah. And I'd have to get back to you on that piece, because I'm forgetting where that is. And I might be able to multitask and find it, but I can double check on that piece. But right now in this piece, there's not that specific requirement. I think practically speaking, the fees for hemp should be used for hemp. But there's that option.
Okay, so that's it, right? That's the.
And that's the end of it.
Yes, the amendment, okay. So let's go back to the question then that we're still struggling a little bit with, and that's, I think on the fees, and I think it's, if I'm understanding correctly, it's not limited to, or is it limited to craft, producers, Vermont craft producers who may have a lot of products if there's a concern about charging them every year for, or is it about everybody? And I think part of the issue here that's come up a couple times, and Bradley mentioned it earlier, was constitutionality of not discriminating, not doing something that unintentionally becomes a constitutional legal issue.
And one thing to keep in mind, I mean, if this bill, if the Cannabis Control Board were to make up regulations that define a craft processor as someone with 10 or fewer employees and less than $100,000 in business or whatever it is, right? And that was just applicable to anyone who wanted to be a processor, because in-state and out-of-state people have to apply to be processors, right? So if those were the regulations or the rules that they made, that's fine. I think if we're that said, I think if we're looking at access to an intrastate markets, or somehow limiting who can and cannot apply as a craft processor, or designing the regulations in such a way that it's very obvious that it's just for Vermont, like that, I can't pull out an example. It's just to tread lightly as we are discussing an in-state versus out-of-state market.
Yeah.
And part of discussing an in-state versus out-of-state market is natural in this context, because there is no intrastate market for cannabis. And so some of these products might wind up being cannabis if the federal law doesn't change.
Yeah.
And so it's important just to kind of try and keep those buckets separate if we can.
I think it's also, there's a issue of do our concerns or the legislature's concerns mirror the board's concerns? And there may not always be, complete overlap here. Richard?
So if the federal law, I hate this because we don't know, but if the federal law doesn't change, I mean, it goes back to the way it was prior to Mitch McConnell having a moment. And it goes back to the way it was. But I think agriculture wants the CCB to control all of this regardless.
Yes.
Yeah, AAFM doesn't want to be in the hemp world. They want the CCB to control the hemp world. And to keep it clean, because as we heard from our hemp people, our local hemp people, in Vermont hemp people, there is a clear line between what they do and then the intoxicating world.
Snoop Dogg.
What's that? Snoop Dogg and whoever else, Ziggy Wormhead, whatever. And they want to keep that line of distinction. So when we talk about these fees, if we have them on our Vermont people, anyone that wants to sell into the state of Vermont will have to have a processor license and a product registration that will allow our CCB to look at it and say, that's 5 milligrams of THC in your product. No, that's in the intoxicating world. And either you can't bring it in or it's got to be sold under age 21 through a dispensary or however, whatever they come up with. So part of it's good, but you got to be balanced constitutionally. We can't say, oh, Vermonters don't have to pay it and out of state do, but and then there's the whole internet sale thing. And that's kind of hinky, I think.
John?
Bradley, maybe CCB. So right now in cannabis retail shops, are all the products made with Vermont grown cannabis?
Can we defer the CCB and see if they can answer that question?
I'm just wondering about the parallel with hemp.
Yeah, I think I can answer that question. Yeah.
So yeah, if you can, I think I can too, but I'm not 100%.
This crossing state lines legally anyway.
Except at the moment, intoxicating hemp is crossing state lines, right? Like I could order
That's below
Cheech and
the,
Chong's,
yeah, that's below the,
or it just doesn't have Delta 9.
Nine, yeah.
Right, yeah,
Okay, so.
and it's not being sold in a dispensary.
right.
So a question I have for anybody here that the chair allows to answer it. The full spectrum hemp distillate or intermediaries, is that used by our Vermont cannabis companies only coming from Vermont? Or is that being imported from out of state currently?
I do not know the answer to that.
Or could it go, if you were a craft processor, could it cross Connecticut River to a processing facility and come back? I mean, essentially you have control.
So let me just bring this back. Does that answer that question affect how we're thinking about this amendment?
Well, it does to an extent because I got educated this weekend. Yeah, I know. Wasn't my idea. I answered the phone. People in the cannabis world like to get the hemp intermediaries to mix with their cannabis products as one person told me, we don't like to make whiskey all the time. Sometimes we want to make light beer. So they can use the hemp intermediary to lower their product down. Also, they like to get the cannabis, that CBG and the CBM and
Yeah.
whatnot, and blend in
Cannabinoids,
theirs
yeah.
as well. But is that stuff today coming from out of state? Is it a mix of out of state and in state? And if the law does go into effect November 1st, should they be able to use, right now we're talking about hemp and cannabis being, there's a Trump wall between the two. Should they hemp intermediaries, full spectrum distillate be allowed to be used? And I'm not talking about refining out the THC out of it and selling that in, because that would be detrimental to our little cannabis market. But the full spectrum, so they can use it to make their,
And it's non-retail.
yeah.
So I think what I'm going to suggest we do is take a break. Let's reconvene in, we've got at 15 minutes. So let's plan to do that. Okay.